Yeah, I'm not sure what RS would have made of all this section. Well, technology was not his thing, as we know. Yes.
I heard his, there was a program sorry. Ah, yes, I was aware of that one.
Yeah, I did that.
Good morning, everybody, and lovely to see everybody here for the Oxford Centre for Spiritual Growth. We think we are all about here, so we're making a prompt start. I'm not on the microphone yet, Ben, but when Professor Tony Brown is on the microphone, it will come loud and clear. This is the first time we are using our new sound system. No pressure, no pressure. And we think it will be fine in the building. Those who are joining us at home, you are very, very welcome. If anyone can't quite hear, could you please put something in the YouTube conversation, and I will be watching that at the back, and we will do what is needed. I am wearing a green shirt because, as we know, tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day. And one of the great things about St. Patrick is that if you look up the collects for St. Patrick, you can have a general St. Patrick collect, you can have an Irish St. Patrick collect, and you can have a Welsh St. Patrick collect. Because, of course, Patrick was Welsh. Ended up in Ireland twice, but he was Welsh. And so it's very good to celebrate St. Patrick today, this weekend, and very good to be looking at the wonderful poetry of R S Thomas. Tony is the co-director of the R S Thomas Research Centre. I knew that deep down. Research Centre in Bangor in Wales. Has been involved with that a long time. Just looking at how many are here and how many have already started viewing online, R S Thomas rightly is a real draw. Wonderful poet, wonderful spiritual insights. We are very, very blessed and thankful to have Tony with us today. What we're going to have is 3 lectures from him. The one now, then a little bit of a coffee break, then another one, then a longer lunch break, and then the third one early afternoon, probably 2 o'clock, but we'll announce that, seeing how the time goes this morning. So without further ado, a wonderful, raucous, Celtic round of applause, please, for Tony.
Thank you. We just missed St. David's Day. Yes. St. David, do the little things, which I think is wonderful. Do the little things. If there's any problem with the sound, I've got to remember 2 things. And I have no problem with, this, but I mean this. I'm not sure what RS would have made of the technology, but you're aware of that. But I mustn't wander around, which I tend to do. So if you see me wandering, I'll be off camera. It's such a great pleasure to see so many people here. The work of the centre in Bangor now has an international reach, as obviously R S Thomas's poetry does. America, Europe. There's a Chinese translation of R S Thomas, collected poems, which was done in Bangor by a Chinese scholar who's still in touch with us. I'm aware, I hope she's there, of at least one French scholar who's online this morning. A few little pieces before I really start. Yeah, let's go. There are various images of R S Thomas in the material that's been made available to you, from his wedding day, dark hair, in 1940, up to late, I can find an English drawing that his wife Elsie Eldridge did of him in 1981. But when he died in 2000, no fewer than 4 of our London national newspapers printed the same image. That one. There he is at the cottage at Sile, on that half window. Let's see, I've forgotten the camera already. This famous picture of him glaring balefully. Because, of course, it fitted the image that some people have of RS. If the reporters, oh, that cranky old Welshman, you know. I was a little upset last week when I received Bichedd Bangor, the Bangor diocesan diary for this period, because they're doing a setting on Good Friday. It's online. There was a garden, if you search on Google, there was a garden, a setting of R S Thomas poetry, including some unpublished material on Good Friday. I think it's at 6 o'clock, but if you go online, you'll find it. So they printed 2 pictures. This one, and the same one. We've now supplied them with some better ones, but Good Friday. So there he is, glaring balefully at the world through the half door down at Sound Hill, the cottage where he and his wife lived in retirement at the far tip of the Llŷn Peninsula. I should perhaps again have distributed this, it is not crucial. Wales. He's born in Holyhead, comes to university in Bangor, has a year in Cardiff at Theological College, comes back to Chirk, and then Talland Green. But the 3 parishes which I shall be mentioning are Menavon, which is in mid-Wales, he's there from the 40s through to the 50s, Eglwysfarth near Aberystwyth, where he was from the mid-50s until 1967, and then Aberdaron. You can't go any further west. The church is almost literally on the beach. It's a wonderful church, and in quietness you can hear the sea. And it's literally outside. And then he lived in retirement nearby. It's not crucial, but there's that ark, Byron Rogers' book. It's on the book list, The Man Who Went to the West. And that, but you couldn't go any further west. It confirmed, this picture confirmed the widely held view of Thomas. He was elusive, reclusive, a bit of a hermit, rude, anti-English, and lived in some sort of wild remote part of North Wales. Well, yeah, he could be rude, especially to newspaper reporters, but there was, of course, an awful lot more to him than that. I always found it delightful. I haven't met him very often. I had lunch with him on occasion, and I said I was going to teach in America. I just bought an American edition of his poetry. Oh yes, he said, they haven't paid me for that yet. Not so old. He was brought up in Holyhead, as I say, on Anglesey, where his father worked as a seaman on the ferries to Ireland after the First World War. And he was thus away from home a lot. R.S. was largely brought up by his mother, who, I've spoken to neighbours, was a formidable lady with strong opinions. And it was her values which dominated the home. Essentially English bourgeois respectability, lower middle class as it were. R.S. went to what was then the University College of North Wales at Bangor, the closest university, on a church scholarship to study classics. The expectation, obviously, given that scholarship, was indeed that he would enter the Anglican Church, the church in Wales. His mother was a staunch churchgoer. After he graduated in 1935, he went to Theological College at Llandarf near Cardiff to study to become a priest, and became a curate in Chirk near the Welsh border in 1937. It was there he met, and I've been referring to a few occasions, he met the artist Elsie Eldridge, who was teaching at Chirk at girls' school. They were married in 1940, and they moved to Talland Green near Wrexham, closer to the English border. And that was in every sense a turning point. Not merely geographically, the start of that move west, but psychologically. He tells in one of his essays how he looked westwards into Wales And from there in the morning, I could see the Welsh hills some 15 miles away, magical and mysterious as ever. And I realised what I had done. My place was not here amongst these Welsh with English accents and attitudes. And I set about learning Welsh so as to get back to the real Wales of my imagination. So wonderfully ambiguous phrase, isn't it? The real Wales of my imagination. What he meant by Wales, and I always want to put quotation marks around it, is something we'll be considering in this first talk. And it takes us indeed to some of the central concerns of his poetry generally, emotionally and spiritually. What this turning point involves in the early 1940s is a kind of remaking of himself. The construction, indeed, of a new identity and the taking on of values very different to those English bourgeois values of his upbringing in Holyhead. It's a kind of casting off of that and it's a remaking, I think. Although he did begin to learn the Welsh language during the war years, the church didn't think, possibly rightly, that he was ready for a Welsh-speaking parish. And instead he was sent in 1942 to Manafor, a parish right in the middle of Wales, rural Wales. A farming area, and the village itself was predominantly English-speaking, although there were Welsh speakers, mainly the sheep farmers up on the hill farms above the village. Now, R.S. had been writing poetry since he was a student. I actually located quite a number of poems by him in the archive. The library has all these old student magazines. You know, we all wrote for them as magazines at one point, didn't we? There they were. It really isn't very good. In fact, it's pretty awful. It's old-fashioned and sentimental, little lyrical evocations of nature, soaked in the rather romantic longings of the narrator as he wanders alone, often in the half-light at dusk or dawn. And I quote here, "The mystic hour, when whitely shone the unknown flower, and darkling wings had swept away the last pale streamers of the day." It's hard to believe this is being written in 1937. This was the age of Auden. Eliot's Wasteland had been published 15 years earlier. Clearly this young clergyman knew nothing about modern poetry. Moreover, his vision of nature up to this time had clearly come from books. He'd read his Wordsworth, where the rural people are imaginatively alive and vital from their daily contact with the natural world and the spirit that lived there. The reality that he found at Manafor, mid-Wales farming country, was of course shockingly different. He says in an interview in the 1970s, and I quote, "I came out of a kind of bourgeois environment, which especially in modern times is protected. It's cushioned from some of the harsher realities. And this muck, and blood, and hardness, the rain, and the spittle, and the phlegm, sounds embellishing, of farm life, was of course a shock to begin with. The farmers and labourers had a harsh life. They were more concerned with the prices that their animals would get at market than the condition of their souls. And yet it was, of course, to these people that R.S. had to minister as their priest. I met a lady called Eleanor Jones last year, who'd been a young girl in the parish, and you remembered him. She was part of his congregation. Her father was a farmer, and R.S. used to come and sit in the kitchen and talk, because they were one of the few Welsh-speaking families. And I said, did the whole family go to church? Oh, my father didn't go to church. He said he was too busy with the farm. If you had a nice Sunday, you know. The poetry that R.S. began to write in this period, in the 1940s, his earliest poetry, comes out of this tension between his idealistic, rather romantic vision of what the rural people would be like, and the stuff he got from Wordsworth, imaginatively and spiritually alive, and the hard reality which faced him. How does he cope as a young priest? And the poetry comes out of this crisis. It comes, he's actually work, it's not something he writes about, it's what he's working some of this stuff out in the poetry. It's what makes it such interesting poetry. They were published in 2 small collections by local presses, The Stones of the Field in 46, An Acre of Land in 52. And then they were collected in a volume, disappear off camera, called Song at the Year's Turning, in 1955. The first volume to be published in London. It was very well reviewed. It was well reviewed on the 3rd programme, as it was then. And it was a hit. It sold well. Hart Davis was pleased, and his name was established. A Peasant, the first poem on the sheet, was one of these early poems and remains perhaps his most famous poem, much anthologized. I'm going to read, not all of these poems, but I'm going to read most of them. I like to look at the words on the page, how they work, where the line breaks are. His use of line break all the way through his career is remarkable. Craig Raine, the critic, said, it's arbitrary. It's arbitrary. Well, I don't think Craig Raine could read the poems very well if he thought that. But, that bend of the line. Let's just see how we go. A Peasant. Iago Pryderch his name, though, be it allowed, just an ordinary man of the bald Welsh hills, who pens a few sheep in a gap of cloud, docking mangles, chipping the green skin from the yellow bones with a half-witted grin of satisfaction, or churning the crude earth to a stiff sea of clods that glint in the wind. So are his days spent. His spittled mirth rarer than the sun that cracks the cheeks of the gold sky, perhaps once in a week. And then at night, see him fixed in his chair, motionless, except when he leans to God in the fire. There's something frightening in the vacancy of his mind. His clothes, sour with years of sweat and animal contact, shock the refined but affected sense with their stark naturalness. If this is your prototype, who season by season, against siege of rain and the wind's attrition, preserves his stock, an impregnable fortress not to be stormed even in death's confusion. Remember him then, for he too is a winner of wars, enduring like a tree under the curious stars. God, it still works, isn't it? It's a good the name, I should make a few points. If there are any questions when I get to the end, do stick your hand up, or we'll have a question session at the end anyway. Iago Pryderch, nothing to do with Shakespeare. Iago, it's the Welsh for James. And Pryderch, the son of Rhydderch, it's not that unusual Welsh surname. So there's nothing special, he's just an ordinary man. Iago Pryderch. The poet, first of all, clearly rather encourages the reader to take a somewhat negative attitude to Iago, doesn't he? He's rather disgusting. He gobs. I mean, he could have said spits. That would have been bad enough. But no, he puts that vowel, gobs, in the fire, he's sweaty and he's smelly. But then there's a turning point at line 16. Shock the refined but affected. Artificial, exaggerated sense. The bourgeois, dare we say it, respectability. And the poet directly addresses the reader there. You, all. Now R S, of course, knows that the reader is going to be someone rather like himself, someone educated, someone who reads poetry, obviously, and lives a long way away from the bald Welsh hills. In other words, the poem reenacts, I think, the poet's own initial distaste and his later revaluation of Iago and people like him, the parishioners. R S comes to see Iago in this poem in more positive terms. He's seen as tough, resilient, a man of endurance. The reader is indeed told that Iago is their prototype, having qualities which we should value. Winner of Wars was in fact more specific when the poem was actually written than now. It was written in 1943. The war is still going on. And as the poet's attitude to Iago changes, and the poet encourages the reader to see Iago anew, the register, the language, changes. At the beginning we get a monosyllabic register with those hard consonants, the P's and the B's, who pens a few sheep in a gap of cloud, docking mangles, turnips. He's standing there almost mindlessly hacking the skin up to throw to the animals. A register, obviously, which is far from lyrical or poetic. It's quite deliberate. It enhances our sense of Iago's harsh life. But then after the turn at line 16, but affected, we get more Latinate words, more cultured, civilized words, prototype, impregnable, attrition. We don't think about these things when we're reading, oh look, he's switching to a Latinate register there. But we pick it up when we read it, particularly when we read it aloud. All those monosyllables, all those much more elegant multisyllabic words. Peasant itself, of course, is a problematic word. And it would have been even in the 40s, of course. I think the word was derogatory then, a bit of an insult. He's a bit of a peasant. And of course, Iago wasn't strictly speaking a peasant anyway. He's not part of a peasant system, a feudal system, a feudal economy, but he's part of a capitalist economy. So that's sociologically not true. In fact, R S is echoing the Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh, whose poems about the Irish country workers repeatedly use that word. Kavanagh's The Great Hunger, interestingly, was published in 1942, and we know that R S had a copy. It's in our collection. It was still on his shelves when he died. One major difference, though, Kavanagh, in a way, helped him see. He's not merely imitating, certainly not imitating Kavanagh, but Kavanagh showed him ways in which you could write poetry about this very unpoetic mode of life. But there are little bends, again, which echo Kavanagh, that lovely moment. See him fixed in his chair, pause, motionless. There's the enjambement, the carrying on of the line, and that's coming through from Kavanagh. But there is a difference. Kavanagh was part of that rural community, farming community. R S, as I said, was an outsider and remains so. But it was to these people that R S had to act as pastor, unsophisticated, not very articulate. That incapacity to speak is a theme that crops up over and over. Especially when they're with the priest. They're shy. He's the vicar. What do you say to him? He's not one of our mates from the VAR. And of course, they would come to the vicar at moments of crisis. family bereavement, illness. And of course he's also struggling to communicate with them, feeling out of his depth, not knowing how to react to all this. And that's what's going on in They, the next poem. I haven't got all the poem on here, just the one I want to talk about. They. I take their hands, hard hands. There's no love for such, only a willed gentleness. Negligible men from the village, from the small holdings. They bring their grief sullenly to my back door and are speechless. It's not actually said in the poem, but so this is one of those situations. They come to him in sort of crisis. They come to the back door, we notice. The vicarage, the rectory at Manavan is actually rather grand. It's still there, it's in private hands now. And, it's got pillars and things. So they don't come there, they go around the back. It's a small point. There is no love for such. The honesty that's so uncomfortable in R S Thomas. There's no love for such. Only a willed, what's the word? There's a little hiatus, the next line. It would be rather different. He said, only a willed gentleness. No, he didn't say that. There's only a willed, next line, gentleness. It's the best I can do, is gentleness, and that's enacted in the poem. The skill is there. In his struggle to minister to these people, to provide spiritual comfort at times of crisis and pain or as death approached, R.S. clearly faces his own issues of faith, his own sense of certainly of incapacity, even of failure. This is expressed in what I think is one of the finest of these early poems. It's on the sheet, the whole poem at this time. Evans. I'll read it all. It's an ancient poem. Evans. Yeah. Many a time I came down his bare flight of stairs into the gaunt kitchen with its wood fire, where crickets sang accompaniment to the black kettle's whine, and so into the cold dark to smother in the thick tide of night that drifted about the walls of his stark farm on the hill ridge. It was not the dark filling my eyes and mouth appalled me, not even the drip of rain like blood from the one tree weather-tortured. It was the dark silting the veins of that sick man I left stranded upon the vast and lonely shore of his bleak bed. As I say, it's not actually said in the poem. We assume the poet is visiting Evans, who's confined to bed, in the role of parish priest, visiting one of his parishioners. And to go outside the poem, and in many ways this is a legitimate critical procedure, but to go outside the poem for a moment, there was a farm worker called William Evans. He's mentioned by R.S. in a parish newsletter, which we found, and we thought it was a good day, at Manavan. He had died. What's in the newsletter is notice of his death. He had died after being bedridden for some time. I met last year this lady, Eleanor Jones, whose father, it was for her father that the original Evans worked, and she confirmed that he'd suffered a farm accident. At the same time, of course, the poem not just about William Evans, it's not just about that one individual. The figure becomes universalised. Interestingly, this poem was in fact published in 1958, which is 4 years after R.S. left Manavan in mid Wales and moved to Eglwysfarth near Aberystwyth. So the poet here is looking back, possibly in one of the periods of difficulty which we know he had in his subsequent parish. He went west because he thought it would be more Welsh, And what he found in Englisvark was a whole bunch of retired military officers. RS was a pacifist and had been a pacifist since the Second World War, got into trouble over it. And there's a lovely story which many people have related about how the retired, he was a colonel, a military officer, distinguished military officer, and they made a film about him starring Gregory Peck, and this guy was a military hero. Anyway, Churchill was dying in the 1960s, 1965, and the family come in dark clothes and his wife. And General Pugh says to RS, are we going to pray for the old man? Churchill, why? Well, he's dying. Haven't you read the news? Haven't you seen it in the newspapers? I don't read the newspapers. And he didn't pray for Churchill. However, that kind of tension was there in the parish. Anyway. The poem opens strikingly with a question. Evans? It might seem as if we join the poem in the middle of a conversation. Someone's just asked the poet about Evans. You remember that old guy Evans? And the question gives rise to the recollection that follows. So the poem's a kind of dramatic monologue. Or alternatively, the thought of Evans may have arisen for some reason in the poet's mind these years later. And again, the memory follows. So it's an internal monologue. Either way, we're overhearing the poet's thinking, the movement of his mind as he recalls the scene and the evident anguish the episode caused him. The language, again, is plain, monosyllabic, bare, gaunt, black. It seems entirely appropriate to the interior of Evans's simple, bare kitchen. There seems to be nobody else at home, just Evans upstairs in bed. A more elaborate multisyllabic register and a more formal literary language would be less suitable. The description of the house, the bare flight of stairs, the gaunt kitchen, tells us of the lack of any form of luxury or even comfort in Evans's life. He's a rural labourer, an occupation which doesn't make him much money. The kitchen with its range we might expect to be a place of warmth and homeliness, and that's not what we've got here. The silence of the kitchen into which the narrator steps is emphasised by the few sounds that are there. The song of the cricket and the black kettle's wine. The darkness which the poet steps out into is almost total. Indeed, its presence is emphasised by its being described as having a tactile quality. The darkness is so intense that it feels enough to smother him, as the darkness is felt rather than seen as a thick tide of night. Again, the image of the darkness as a tide introduces an association between the darkness and an all-engulfing sea that's picked up in the second stanza, where the darkness is filling the poet's eyes and mouth, and the dark tide is silting Evans's veins. The next image in stanza 2, the drip of rain like blood from the one tree, weather tortured, is for me key to the poem's full meaning. We assume that the immediate reference is to an actual tree, solitary out on the rain-swept hillside. But that striking comparison of the rain dripping like blood opens up, obviously, new and important resonance. The reference to the tree on the Welsh hillside being weather-tortured, again, manifestly reminds the reader of Christ's torture on the tree cross. In lines 13 to 16, the darkness, again, as I say, has connotations of death, silting up Evans's veins, clogging the flow of his lifeblood as he lies as if cast up on an empty shore. The end. We notice that word vast, Evans is seen as alone, helpless, in an apparently empty, godless universe in which he seems to have little significance. The darkness perhaps suggesting here, I mean, again, think of the night sky. There's no artificial light, in there. There's no street lights. The darkness suggesting a universe devoid of meaning or values. And it's the realization of this situation which had appalled Thomas, his word. The strength of that verb underlines the strength, the depth of Thomas's realization. He's not succeeded in bringing to Evans the spiritual comfort which it was his role as a priest to bring, the comfort born of the Christian message, that Christ died on the cross to redeem humanity, including Evans. That message of God's love and of the possibility through faith of eternal life. And we notice that I. And that I is right there at the beginning of the line. That I left stranded manifests his sense of culpability. Indeed, I think there's a strong sense that Thomas the priest, in the deep negating darkness on the Welsh hillside, is as alone as the man he's left in his bleak bed. The final image, always seems to me, is of one helpless, lonely man thinking of the helplessness of another. Very simple poem, but it's so powerful, I think. In 1954, he moves, as I said, from mid-Wales, Manavan, to Eglwysfart near Aberystwyth. It's again a rural parish where the church is on the busy main road to Aberystwyth. There were farms on the uplands, and he visited them, obviously. But I think that those others, published in 1961, again probably looks back to the hill farmers of the first parish. But wherever it's set, it does ultimately deal not only with Thomas's attitudes to the rural people, now the hill farmers, but towards Wales itself. The poem sets the agenda for the way R S Thomas will go on to see, or rather construct, Wales from the early 1960s onwards. It's his most nationalistic phase. The epigraph is from the Welsh poet Dewi Emrys, who was writing in the first part of the 20th century. A gofid gwerid gyfan yn fy ngri, fel tairni'r tar. And the grief of the whole people in my cry, like the fierceness of a fire. Gwerin is a very resonant word in Welsh. It means the folk. It means the people themselves, with connotations of the rural. A gofid gwerid gyfan, the whole people. I've looked long at this land, trying to understand my place in it. Why, with each fertile country so free of its room, this was the cramped womb at last took me in from the void of unbeing. Hate takes a long time to grow in, and mine has increased from birth. Not for the brute earth that is strong here and clean and plain in its meaning, as none of the books are that tell, but of the war of heart with head, leaving the wild birds to sing the best songs. I find this hate for my own kind, for men of the Welsh race who brood with dark face over their thin navel to learn what to sell. Yet not for them all either. There are still those other castaways on a sea of grass who call to me, clinging to their doomed farms. Their hearts, though rough, are warm and firm, and their slow wake through time bleeds for our sake. Now, we must be careful always of simply identifying the first person I in a poem with the author. One wants to see an element of enactment there. It's a poetic I, it's a construct. But there's certainly, again, an autobiographical element here. This was the cramped womb at last took me in from the womb of unbeing, and remembers that loneliness in the last poet. It's a powerful image. It's almost as if he feels he's been reborn or has gained a sense of true, authentic identity from his contact with the Welsh Hill people. But look what's happened to the way in which he sees these farmers. They're no longer sweaty and uncouth. They're ultimately seen sympathetically. Indeed, in many respects here, they seem to come to represent Wales itself. This is in many ways, I think, a key R S Thomas poem, although in fact it's not received an awful lot of critical attention. It seems to me that there are two versions of Wales here. There are the Welsh people, my own kind, who he hates. It presumably means the English-speaking Welsh, the vast majority, of course. R S wasn't always popular in Wales. I mean, let's make that absolutely clear. The image of this cranky poet staring balefully through his door as, not entirely unpopular. He presumably means, as I say, the English-speaking Welsh, but more importantly, crucially indeed, he means the Welsh who market themselves and their country to the tourists, mainly from England, of course. These people are commercial and materialistic. I live in Bangor. The main coast road is the A55. You don't go on the A55 on a Friday night because it's nose to tail cars coming in to the second homes in North Wales and the caravans coming from Manchester and Liverpool. End of, the rant. But this sense of marketing. But people, on the other hand, there are people who need to make their income from the tourism. We can't be naive about this. But RS is quite clear, that marketing of Wales, the attitude to tourism is constantly a negative one. He hated the tourists down at Aberdaron. I've got some sympathy with it. I don't go there in the summer if I can help. But then there are the rural Welsh, presumably Welsh-speaking. They live a life which is quiet, simple, non-commercial, non-commercial even in farming. These are the others. But we notice how vulnerable this way of life is. Doomed, he says. The significance of the sea imagery we'll come back to later this morning. It recurs in his work. This is one of the early announcements of a duality which runs through Thomas's work from here on. A vision not just of Wales, in fact, but of the modern world. He's not just a poet about Wales. Of course he isn't. On the one hand, he sees the world of capitalism, consumerism, the materialism, the modern mass society, if you will, where most of us live our lives. A materialistic, consumerist world in which the individual is in danger of ultimately becoming merely a unit of production and consumption, to be advertised at and the rest of it. On the other hand, R S Thomas sees the possibility of a world which rejects those materialistic values, a way of life which is akin to those others, a way of life that's simple, rural, in which the individual can be free, can fulfill himself or herself imaginatively and spiritually. Moreover, as we'll see in a moment, for R.S. it's by living this simple rural life that one can become aware of, open to the spiritual. And you can see where I'm going with this, I think. The first way of life he identifies with England, and the latter an idealised Wales, rural Wales. But what we're talking about clearly is not two places, but two ways of life. It's not just England, but as I say, our modern competitive capitalist world. He presents a challenge to all of us as to how we might live our lives in a modern, consumerist, high-tech, militaristic world. This is the world of the machine. capital M, he uses a capital M, which we see in his 1972 collection, and which I want to come back to in the second talk this morning. It's the nightmare world which he portrays, for instance, in Postscript, the next poem on the sheet. As life improved, their poems grew sadder and sadder. Was there oil for the machine? It was the vinegar in the poet's cup. The tins marched to the music of the conveyor belt. A billion mouths opened. Production, the wheels whistled. Among the forests of metal, the one human sound was the lament of the poets for deciduous language. Again, it's vulnerable, but of course it's alive, it's deciduous, it changes from season to season, it's not metallic. But what of the other poem? If this is our modern world and the fragility of the world of the imagination and the spirit, what of the other poem? Wales is less a place, I want to insist, than a mode of living, imaginative and spiritually aware, associated in the poetry with a group of qualities. We'll be coming back to these repeatedly. Simplicity, cleanness, that's a kind of almost RS tick, plain, simple, clean, rural. We see it in the others. The earth is strong here and clean and plain in its meaning. In law, because I think these themes do have a contemporary resonance far beyond Wales or poetry, we see the farmer Job Davis, patient, notice his name, and resilient, and 85 years old. He doesn't use modern technology. The rhythm of the long scythe kept this tall frame live. What to do? Stay green. Never mind the machine whose fuel is human souls. Live large, man, and dream small. The resonance there, I probably don't have to labour. Dream small. No big gestures. Small is beautiful. Green. Stay green. Do the small things. That's from David again. It all seems to me, at least, to be very relevant to our contemporary world. Much more relevant now than it probably was then in many ways of our environmental concerns. I'm sure that he would be very much an environmentalist today. In the Moor, the next poem, we get a fuller expression of this vision in this period in the 1960s, which leads us into some of the themes, how we communicate with God, which we'll explore more fully in the second lecture. Again, I'll read the Moor. Again, he's out in the countryside. It was like a church to me. I entered it on soft foot, breath held like a cap in the hand. It was quiet. What God was there made himself felt, not listened to, in clean colours that brought a moistening of the eye, in movement of the wind over grass. There were no prayers said, but stillness of the heart's passions. That was praise enough, and the mind's session of its kingdom. I walked on, simple and poor, while the air crumbled and broke on me generously as bread. He doesn't want to labour. The last image. Again, we notice though what God was there. Whatever God was there, it seems to be. It's a strikingly unassertive, tentative approach. And lines up with some of the things I would say later. And we notice again that clean. Whatever God is there isn't reached by speech in some sort of intercessory prayer. What we need is stillness and the cessation of reasoning. And the same posture, the same tones are present in kneeling. Now here he's not in the fields manifestly, but in church, in front of his congregation. But the impulse is again away from speech, and we'll see his thoughts about the incapacity of human speech when it comes to approaching God later. The impulse is away from speech and towards silence and waiting. I'll end with this. Kneeling. Moments of great calm. Kneeling before an altar in summer. Waiting for the God to speak. The air a staircase for silence. The sun's light ringing me as though I acted a great role. And the audience is still. All that close throng of spirits waiting as I for the message. Prompt me, God. But not yet. When I speak, though it be you who speak through me, something is lost. The meaning is in the waiting. He sees himself in front of the congregation playing his role, conducting the service, but when he speaks, something is lost. Again, there's a personal thing going on here, incapacity again, but there's also a sort of theological thing going on. The words don't do it. We've got to align ourselves with the spiritual. We've got to align ourselves with God, and that seems to be an approach and motif that he comes back to, and I'll come back to it in the second part this morning. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are any crowd, perhaps we'll take one or two questions. But again, I'm happy to talk with people during the interval. It's always, where's the... see what I do when I'm walking out of the
We
line.
shall just hold the questions, Tony.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Huge thanks, Tony. Huge thanks, everybody. I'm just going to run and get another microphone for anybody who wishes to ask questions.
Good.
So we have 20 seconds of chatting to each other.
Okay, we'll wait. We'll take just a couple of questions. I'm very happy to talk to people over coffee, and as the day goes on, the best part of the best part is the talking that goes on the sides, as it were. We'll wait for the technology. I can hear RS. In the silence in our chat, I'll just draw attention. There are some flyers on the back there. There's an annual R S Thomas festival at his last parish, at Aberdara, on the far end of the Clee, in June. It's 13th or 16th of June this year. If you go online, you'll find it with sort of speakers. But it's just such a wonderful place. There will be tourists there. There will be tourists there in June. But I always tell students, in Bangor, if they're interested at all, go down. It's a different world. It's by the sea, it's tranquil, and you can see bards say the island of pilgrimage there. But there are some little flyers on the back there. Okay, we'll get a microphone.
And I think
yes.
we are on. Who would like to ask the question?
What was Horace's relationship with the Anglican Church of Wales?
Problematic. He was unhappy with the revisions to the prayer book, for example, New English Bible, like. It's very interesting. I mean, theologically he was radical, as we'll see, but in terms of liturgy he was profoundly conservative. Yeah, he didn't do bishops, the stories are many. Barry Morgan, later the Archbishop of Wales, was appointed dean down there, and went and visited and introduced himself. I'm dean of the Bangor diocese. Well, I suppose somebody has to do it. All that. And there was a famous story, which I've heard from two people who were there, meeting in the cathedral. Priests, I don't know what the topic was, and whoever was speaking stopped, and the bishop asked if there were any questions. There was silence. And apparently you've identified the priest by their parish. Does Aberdaron have anything to say? Not really. Aberdaron was mainly asleep. So no, the relationship was difficult, and when he got to retirement age, there was certainly flexibility enough for him to be able to carry on for at least a few years, because they had nobody lined up. In fact, there was no priest appointed at Aberdaron for some years until Edward Davis was appointed. But let's just say his offer of staying on was not accepted by the diocese. I strongly suspect that the then bishop was let to sit back, and you can see why, can't you? He challenged. He was awkward. He was a fully paid up member of the awkward squad. He asked awkward questions in his work. He asked awkward questions in the press, and his poetry was a challenge. And awkward people don't, yeah.
The nearer you come to that mic, the better we hear.
Oh, okay. So, there. Could people hear okay during the talk? That's the main thing. Yeah. Okay, that's our thing. Yeah.
I think there was a hand in here, and then I'll come over.
Obviously, the line that meaning is in the waiting reminds one of T.S. Eliot.
Yes.
I mean, were there any other obvious influences on his poetry from other poets?
Some I'll talk about. Theologians I'll come on to, because that whole notion of waiting. Yes, he knew his Eliot right through. I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't think we have his copy of Eliot there. Kavanagh early on, but in religious terms, it's yes, Eliot. Although the odd phrase, I mean, the movement of Eliot's too potent an influence to get too close to. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yes. And sometimes there are common sources, of course. But there's a poem called Border Blues, where the local people are all going off to a pantomime in Birmingham on a bus. We've just found, somebody just sent us this wonderful picture of him at church. With an old-fashioned bus in the back, and they're all going off. We don't know whether, I'm going to use this picture somewhere. And there's the young curate in the middle of it, not looking as though he's looking to enjoy it very, very much. But this poem, Border Blues, is very much like The Waste Land in technique. So there are snatches of old songs in Welsh and English, and a general feeling that we've declined, spiritually. So that's a very direct, it's not a terribly good poem, but there's a direct awareness of his reading of Eliot. But it's four quartets, obviously, that's the real influence. So, okay, yeah.
And last one for now, there will be time for more later.
Yeah.
What does RS stand for?
Ronald Stewart. Ronald Stewart, not Welsh names. Ronald came from his mother. When the Stewart was picked up, I don't know. There is stories that he kind of used it and used RS later, and I'm desperately trying to think what's on his birth certificate. We must have a birth certificate, because it might be there. But it's Ronald Stewart anyway. I think they're just names that his mother, I'm sure it was the mother, liked. But I mean, he again, when he published poems as a student. He used nom de plume, and the RS came in quite early on. He mentioned somewhere, and I can tell you now, he mentioned somewhere very early in his autobiography writing for, he says, a theosophical journal when he was a curate. Myself and my co-director, Joseph Walter Davis, have spent some time, I mean, continually, but, you know, where the devil are these pieces that he wrote for? Which theosophical journal? Because it was quite a fad early in the century. It's just a mode of Hinduism, really. I wrote to the Theosophical Society, because there still is one, and it's basically derived from Eastern religions. And there was one which was a possibility. I took myself down to the National Library, and blow me, they're there. There are 3 essays written by R S Thomas as a curate when he's at Chirk. There was a discussion society, and there was a guy called E. Thomas who became a friend, and obviously he was part of this debating society. So he's in many respects self-educated. I know he went to theological college, but he only went for a year. So he's classics background. He goes to Landa for a year. It should have been 2 years, but then they wanted a curate in Chirk, and so thank you very much, and off he went. Apparently it wasn't very popular at Landa. So he then sets to, and he actually says this, built himself a library. We've got some of the books because he kept them. And there's Welsh poetry because he's kind of teaching himself Welsh. But there are, you know, all sorts of Oliver Kavanagh is there, but some sort of references to his sort of theological reading. A lot of this is self-exploratory. I mean, we don't know what the syllabus was at Lambeth. We've written, and it don't exist, or it's so general, rather like the syllabus of the classics departments at Bangor in the 30s. So courses will be taken from, and there's a list which is seemingly unhelpful. It's not like now you've got your learning outcomes and all the rest of it. Okay.
I think we have had many learning outcomes this morning, including the initials. Thank you, Tony, so much. We are going to have a little break now, and we shall be back at about 11:30. Those who are joining us at home, we will need the second YouTube link for the second talk. See everybody at 11:30. Thank you.
That was a real problem, you know. The word said.
Stay there just for a minute.
You hear the sound of his voice, the words.
What might be the speakers round the wall?